Welcome on into 19 on the Clock, your Tri-State high school and college sports podcast. I'm your host, Brad Pushkar. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, Jackson McCarty. Jackson, how are we doing this fine Thursday?
We're doing good. It's easier to keep hold of the basketball season now, fortunately for us.
As teams get eliminated, it does make things easier to keep track of, especially when you're trekking 3 states.
Yes, I know Indiana, we have a smaller sect of them, but yeah, when you get between Ohio and Kentucky, we've got just so many teams, but the cream is rising to the top.
Yes.
We're getting more definite looks at the playoff schedule, and we will actually finally be able to do a little bit more coverage on Kentucky because I'm aware that it's been a little bit of a rocky road, for this podcast trying to get a hold of Kentucky as the playoffs started, scheduling issues and whatnot. We are going to do a full look at the Region 9 boys,
Yes.
all 8 teams in that bracket, tell you what I think they need in order to become the region champions. But before we do that,
I was going to say we're also going to look at the
yeah.
college game.
Yes.
See where teams are sitting. We have one more game this weekend of regular season, and then it is all conference tournaments.
Right.
So we're going to look at where some teams are playing out. I got to talk with a local bracketologist, so we will hear my conversation with him. But first,
yes,
let's talk about some Ohio girls basketball.
Yeah.
Because we are in the Final Four.
Yeah,
Correct.
2 of our local teams are currently in the Final Four within their divisions.
Yes.
One team we have been tracking constantly. We haven't really been able to get away from Purcell Marian over these last couple weeks. That is a good thing.
Nor do we want to.
Right. I'm about to say, any excuse to talk about the Cavs, I will absolutely take. But before we jump into them, kind of go back through what we know about the Cavs, you have spent a little bit of time up in Toledo from career work and living up there for a little bit. They're going to be taking on Notre Dame Academy. So tell me a little bit about what you know about that team.
Notre Dame Academy just is not a direct comparison, but it's very similar to the way that, in my understanding, Moeller is of being a strong powerhouse in a lot of different sports, especially basketball.
Mm-hmm.
This is the girls' 9th state tournament that they're going to after winning the regional title. I know they defeated Ashland. I don't remember exactly how well they did while I was up there those 2 years, a couple of years ago now. But they were always a team that we would mention and be talking about on the news side of things. And that's even without having a sports department at my station to fully cover it.
Yeah, I was about to say, if it's transcendent enough for the primarily news producers and folks behind the scenes to know what it is,
yes,
especially because of its athletics, that's how you know it's a pretty good school.
Yes.
Word of mouth is a significantly harder deal in high school athletics, but the transcendent ones make it work. And it sounds like that's what Purcell is kind of going up against here.
Yes, and I know you've had a couple quick notes of they're 21-6 right now. Mm-hmm. They haven't had a game inside of double digits all year.
Right, and that's not just including the wins. That's including the losses too, which I just thought was so strange. It's especially for a team that's got 21 wins, to have all 6 losses of your season be by 10 or more is kind of a fascinating ordeal.
How in depth did you look at the schedule for that?
I mean, it was fairly surface level.
Okay.
Just because once you get up in that corner of the state, it's not like, since we're covering them, I could really tell you how great that schedule was anyways.
Because I was going to say, when you mentioned 6 losses, that gives me tournament vibes in a way of playing out of state and losing more so than but let me look real quick because I can double check this.
I should have wrote, because there was one team they lost to twice.
They lost to one team from Indiana who has had, again, and I'm saying this, who has had a what's the word? Miss Indiana basketball.
Oh, okay. There you go.
It's from my hometown of Fort Wayne, Homestead.
That makes sense.
They did lose to one of their local teams, Perrysburg.
Okay.
Magnificat, which I believe looks like an academy.
Yeah.
I was going to say a lot of these teams are not
Not
local.
Okay, so those multiple, those double
Gabriel Richard, I don't know that school as well.
Okay.
But they're the Fighting Irish. Oh, and they're in Ann Arbor because they're playing Michigan.
Yeah, there you go.
So Fort Wayne, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and then one team which they lost 2 by 2. According to they did lose by 2 to Perrysburg.
And that's on Max Preps?
That's on Max Preps.
Maybe I just can't read then.
Yeah,
I don't know. But if that's the one that they had within single digits, then I'll take missing the single. But
there's a couple others that are it's like 9. There's a couple 9s that I think you just overlooked, but
then maybe just disregard me. I don't know what's going on. Either way, a large majority of their schedule separated by double digits.
Yes.
So let's get back into the DMA
because they're facing Purcell Marian.
Correct.
Our local team, who we've been following and talking about, D. Alexander.
Constantly. Matter of fact, we just ran a story on her earlier this week because she got her McDonald's All-American jersey.
There we go.
Very deserved. The first in Purcell Marian history, I believe. And while obviously this would not be a first for the Cavs to win a state title, they're actually chasing their 4th straight. But, in case that seems normal to anybody. But it's still a situation where the nerves are going. You're still playing really good schools. You do have to be on your A game. And it's probably – I don't want to assume it's the last time because if you get to 4 straight anything, you can just keep on keeping on. Mm-hmm. But Dee does graduate this year. She's moving on. So it is kind of the last ride, at least with this nucleus that the team currently has. So the quick facts that you need to know. They're also 21-6, 10-0 in their conference. Mm-hmm. 71.6 points per game to 45.3 allowed. Absurd differential. Every time we talk about them, I think it just gets a little bit bigger every time.
I honestly think it does because I was like, I don't remember being 70 last time.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, and because the playoff run has still been so great for them. They're not slowing down much, if at all, and just that steam continues to build. What I really wanted to focus on here, because we have talked about D. Alexander and Kiera Miller and the folks that make that work, I wanted to focus on what I need to see from them in this game to not only feel good about them winning, but to feel good that number 4 is on its way. Mm-hmm. First, I do want to focus on finding consistency behind the arc. I know we talk a lot about those 3-point numbers. They're at about 28% or just a shade under it as a team from 3. That doesn't quite move the needle. Mm-hmm. Now, granted, I know that they do a lot of their work inside the arc, and the team is not at a lack for scoring and making things happen.
No, but I mean that's very clear with 70 points to 45 allowed. Yeah.
Exactly, but whenever you're going up against the final 4 teams in the state, 27.7 points per 3 usually is not. That number has to come up.
Yes.
You've got to make value of your shots. They averaged almost 64 field goals per game. The next closest in the Miami Valley Conference was Lockland with 54.6. That's such a massive swing that you're probably not going to have, again, going up against the very top of Ohio's girls basketball teams. Mm-hmm. So that efficiency is so paramount to what they're trying to do. And then lean on Dee, but don't rely on her. You can go through some of the box scores, and she's had some great performances throughout this playoff run. But to a certain point, if you live by one player, you're probably going to die by one player. We all love a tournament hero, but how often do those teams actually take the title? You know what I mean? Yeah. So making sure that, like I said, the Kiera Millers and the Samaya Wilkins of the world really step into their roles and what they need to do and bring home in and around 10 or above a night.
And I just want to clarify for my sake and maybe the listeners as well, but that's 64 attempts per game?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah, that is 64 attempts per game.
Yeah. Because I was like, man, they're making 63 a game. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, if they're making 63, I don't know that 71 works. But.
Yeah, because I feel like in a playoff game like this, and in a tournament game like this, you're going to get maybe closer to 45.
Yep.
And so, yes, we'll say 50% of those get you around 50 points.
Yeah.
Give or take some. So you want to be making the most of those and making sure they're going in if you're getting good looks and things like that.
Yeah, and even if you're dominating the glass, there's just not going to be as much rebounds because these teams are going to make it a little bit more often than the collective of your conference.
Yes.
That's simple numbers.
And I think these teams are probably going to fight a little harder
yes.
at the glass as well to challenge you on those on both the defensive and the offensive side. So
and that target that gets put on your back when you're a three-peating champion.
Absolutely.
They're going to be bringing all the heat that they possibly can. Talking about Mount Notre Dame. And Purcell, they continuously bring everything they've got every time they're on the court. it's going to be such a fun matchup. I'm very excited for it. Probably the most excited I've been for any one singular basketball game all year.
Yeah. And so that is Saturday,
Yep.
Purcell Marian against Toledo Notre Dame Academy.
Yes. Now, for this next one, again, we run into a similar issue. One of our local schools playing Lancaster Fairfield Union. Stats, pretty hard to come by. What we do know is they're undefeated, so it's hard to assume they're bad.
Okay.
And that's really kind of where the buck stops.
Hey, they haven't been defeated. Probably good.
Yeah, it's a safe assumption. It's kind of hard to even if you do have a weak schedule, so to say, to not drop a single game.
I know.
Come on, what are we doing?
Incredible.
Right. But the team we know plenty about, the Alter Knights. We did talk about them, I don't remember if it was last week or 2 weeks at this point, but when we had all of those GCL games, Alter was included in that, being in the co-ed. They're 18-8, 4-6 within conference, so it has been kind of a little bit of a surprising run for the Knights here. They average about 50 points per game. They allow about 43, so that defense is kind of the staple there. But they do have, some options. And then going back to their last matchup, they beat McNicholas in a very close one that I believe I came on this podcast and predicted McNicholas to win. Alter ended up winning by 4. So got it, survive in advance. Now you're, it's a bigger fish, 27-0. That's a big mark to beat, but you do have your opportunity.
But hey, it's the Lenten season, and you can fry that bigger fish.
Yes, you absolutely can. Look at you, Brad.
Hey.
Look at you. The start of the Lenten season and everything. All right, so can you tell that I was not raised Catholic?
Can you tell that I've had to run every single fish fry that we have each day this week?
If you are Catholic and are participating in the Lenten season, go to Fox 19 now. Look at our fish fry list.
Right at the top of the webpage.
And yeah, you'll hear plenty about that in pretty much every show we've got.
So what do you want to see from the Knights this weekend?
Okay. So I already kind of tipped my hand a little bit. The defense, excuse me, the defense is paramount here.
Sure.
They have some options like Maddie Moody, who we'll talk about here in a minute, on that offensive front that make you feel safe. But whenever you're at the point that you are, and people didn't really expect you to be here, you do have to lean on what got you to the dance to begin with. It's holding those lead scorers a little under their averages every time, making everybody sweat it out a little bit more, and just running the energy out so that you can capitalize. And that all bleeds through the defense. They had the third lowest points allowed all year within the GCL co-ed, second to lowest points per game. So it's the GCL, which we've already kind of learned across South, co-ed and girls, typically trends to be more of a defensive front, just kind of how the conference teaches things. I expect that GCL style of ball will absolutely need to be a factor here if they're going to beat, I don't want to mess this name up, Fairfield Union Falcons. Okay. Another one, again, tip my hand, Maddie Moody. Her cast has to be ready in case she doesn't just absolutely ball out. She averages 18.9 a night. She's had some great performances. As a matter of fact, against McNick, she dropped 32. She really willed that team to being where they ended up being. But nobody else is above 8 points per game. Or if they are, it's right around that hovering spot. You've got Izzy Arcuri, Deshae Shepard. They both had 10-plus against McNick. We need more of that. We have the formula from that last game. We know what works. We know what they need. It's just about replicating it again and again until you can hold that title. And then the last point, you've got to move the ball around. 6 assists as a team against McNick. That's probably not going to function. You've got to be ready. You've got to have your distributor. You've got to have somebody keeping that offense from getting too stagnant. And again, just force feeding it to Maddie Moody probably is not going to work. Especially once teams realize, hey, this is kind of becoming their offense. If we can limit her to 15 to 20, we're probably going to win this game. And so if you can keep that ball moving around, you make it, at least on the surface, look a whole lot more difficult to defend yourself, even if you are still primarily trying to get the ball to Maddie to score.
I was going to say, when I see a six assist game, to me that also doesn't scream like, ISO or something like that. It's taking shots that get missed, that get grabbed, that get put back, things like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can get the glass protection against a team like this, kind of as you mentioned.
Yeah.
That you're just going to be facing a different quality of opponent per se.
Right. Yeah. You're not in your district anymore. You're not in your region anymore. This is the big time. The team has to be moving as one, and assists. Even if the game plan is not, hey, we want 15 assists tonight. The game plan will naturally end up being you get 15 assists per night if you're moving this thing around.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be the old basketball camp. You got to pass 3 times before anyone's allowed to take a shot. But you got to get that moving around and help create some space and things like that.
Or the game like where you weren't allowed to dribble and you just had to pass it until you got somebody into a position to score.
I did do that now that I think about it.
Yeah, it's like you can't necessarily operate like that. But
no.
if your offense is making it function, it's going to happen regardless.
Everybody just stops, pass, stop, pass.
To be fair, I bet you could get a possession or two in where you actually
score
on that because they are so deeply confused as to what's happening.
They're thrown off by it, yes.
Yeah, they think that the team that they're playing does not know the rules, but that trick will wear off eventually.
Yes.
All right, so those 2 games, Saturday, must watch, must keep eyes on. Have your Twitter ready.
Semifinals.
Yeah, I'm sure
Exciting
we'll have
games.
cameras at both of those games for Sports Wrap on Saturday.
Mm-hmm.
But we've got a whole host of Kentucky basketball to talk about. Finally.
Yes.
Finally. Very happy that we're getting to do a little bit more on each of these teams. I already mentioned it at the beginning of the podcast, but Kentucky, I don't know necessarily that I gave it the shine that it needed, so let's correct that now, right?
Let's dig in.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned at the top, I'm going to look at all of the 8 teams remaining in Kentucky Region 9 boys basketball, and I'm going to tell you what I think they need in order to win the whole thing.
Okay.
So we'll start with Cooper, 20-5. Their path to the regionals, they'll play Highland first, then they'll get the winner of Covcath-Dixie, and then whoever survives. On the other half, I'm not going to go through all 4
we will get to them.
Exactly, yes. But I will at least tell you who they're playing, whatever.
In these first 2, yeah.
Yes. My trick here with Cooper, they won this region if Andy Johnson keeps doing his thing.
Okay.
We all love a tournament hero. Mentioned it earlier. He has been just a hero, period, for this team. He is an absolute freak of nature, almost 24 points per game, over 6 boards, 38.2% from behind the arc. He is the guy in the tournament that I think could will his team almost single-handedly to it. So if he just continues his form, all those other pieces that they have on that roster around him are going to help and get the job done and continue to lift them to at least to that final and then possibly beyond that.
Okay. So for Cooper, you do like having the guy.
I think that with how their team is set up, there's really no way around it at this point, and I would be scared to make a change because they have been so driven by what Andy has done this year that you have to lean into it, and I think that they've pretty much committed as a team of being like, this is who we are. And if those like I said, those complementary pieces behind him continue to, I can get 12 tonight, or I can get 9, or that's going to be enough more often than it's not, especially while you're still in the region.
Okay, yeah, and let's move on to who they're facing off against. Highlands.
Yeah, the Bluebirds. So they are 18-12. Of course, they'll be playing Cooper. They won this region if they can force teams to match their offense, which lends this to be a pretty fun matchup in my mind. They're averaging almost 73 points per game as a team. 4 guys over 10, none above 13, which I actually really enjoy. That's such a scary proposition for your first tournament opponent because, you have no idea where the buckets are coming from.
Yes.
Now, Finn Boldine, Nathan Rickard would technically be your guys to watch. They kind of lead the charge on the point scoring on average, but it really is a hodgepodge, completely mixed bag of, okay, tonight it's going to be Finn, or okay, tonight it's going to be this kid, or whatever. So if you can maintain that element of surprise and just, continue to match that average, if you're getting to 72.7,
you're doing something right.
Yeah, you're not only are you doing something right, but you're going to force a lot of teams into being very uncomfortable. Because even if their offense, Highlands is not known for its defense this year. I believe the average points allowed was up in the 60s, so it's not this giant margin. but it's still so impressive because not everybody can match that.
No.
You know, we've talked a lot about defense-heavy teams. As a matter of fact, we were just talking about how pretty much the entirety of the GCL is focused on that defense. You catch enough teams that are kind of taught like that, and you're still getting like 60, most of the times those offenses aren't going to have the engine running hot enough to keep up.
No.
So you go in there, make yourself about the surprise, and make your offense continue to just do as it's been. You're going to be a headache.
You weren't planning on doing this,
Okay.
but I'm going to hit you with it.
Love a curveball.
For this for the first game of this, Highlands Cooper.
Mm-hmm.
Who's your favorite to win?
I think it's got to be Cooper.
Okay.
You know, they have that strength throughout the season. They've hung in there with the best of their region already, beaten a lot of them. It's hard to bet against kind of the top dog here, and again with that tournament hero in the making with Andy, that's too hard to pick against at this juncture. But Highlands is kind of a great matchup for them early.
Yeah.
It'll tell us a lot about the Jags after this weekend.
Very good. And they will be playing the winner of Highlands. Cooper will be playing the winner of Covcath and Dixie Heights. Let's start with the Colonels.
Well, which Colonel? They're both the Colonel.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
So
That's me reading poorly.
No.
Let's start with Covcath.
In defense, Dixie Heights, whenever I hear the name, I don't want to say I forget they're the Colonels, but I want to say it's something else, and then I go, oh, no, it's the Colonels. I don't know why, but Dixie Heights lines up with something else in my head. But we'll start with Covcath, like you said, 23-8. Of course, playing Dixie, going up against the other two we mentioned, like you said. They won the region if they can limit the opposing team's threes.
Okay.
So Athens McGillis, they've got their lead scorer over 20 points per game. They've got Cash Harney, almost 16 points per game. Donovan Bradshaw, over 12. Very talented trio. They shoot 30.1 from behind the arc. You catch a team that has that three-point shooting ability, has that momentum to them, and that becomes very daunting. As we've seen, at every level of basketball at various stages. Once a team finds that stroke behind the arc, you can't keep up unless you're going down and getting and ones pretty much every time.
Yes.
So that my big focus for them would be if you can't match the three, which I really at this point I don't think they've given us enough reason to believe that they're going to. You've got to stop it, one way or the other, and so I tend to believe that it's going to be the limiting side. Worth mentioning, Athens McGillis is the only guy with more than 100 three-point attempts on the team.
Okay.
He has 215, and he shoots a 33% clip. So the guy that they're putting it in the hands of most still not really helping that average improve that much, which kind of lends credence to what I was saying about I don't know if matching it's really an option here.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like matching it, but it does feel like a let Athens keep putting those up.
Yes.
And the ones that he hits are going to benefit you in the long run anyway.
Right, and if you're keeping the opposing team below like a 40% collective clip, what Athens does and what Bradshaw helps and Cash and you're going to probably still get it if it's 38-37% from behind the arc, but once you hit those real shooters, the Andys of the world who you might have to play next week, that's going to become a problem. So, while it might not necessarily be the note this week, it's definitely my long-term focus on them.
So do you think that Dixie Heights, then, do they have the three-point shot to make Covcath worry?
Dixie Heights confuses me.
Okay.
And quickly, 21-9, going up against Covcath.
Yep.
Their offensive numbers are very, very good, but there's not just a ton of volume to it. So 53.4% as a team from the field goal field goal percentage.
Yeah.
Just because I can't speak. 43.2 from behind the arc.
Okay.
They've got Griffin Derry who puts up 16 points, almost 50% from three.
Okay.
49.7. They average 59.8 per game or points per game.
Yeah.
How does that work? How are your percentages that good, but you're not at 60?
You're running out the shot clock each
Right.
possession.
It's like you go insane for the first quarter and then just hold the ball for the rest of it. Cause I haven't been to a Dixie Heights game this year. I don't want to speak out of turn, but it's like those numbers don't match the rest of it.
Could it be some crazy outliers?
It could be, but
Okay.
like I wouldn't think so because like we're 30 games deep at this point. Like the
Yes.
outliers are going to average out.
Yeah.
The same way the peaks are. And so like it feels like we're at the median and then it's still not at 60. Like if I read you 54 or 53.4 from field goal, 43 from behind the arc, you would say, "Oh, that team scores 70 a night."
Yeah. I when I was reading up through your notes and I hadn't seen points per game yet, I was like, oh, okay, so yeah, you just need to stop the three-pointer. But now I'm like, do you need to stop the three-pointer here?
Right. Yeah,
If you're CovCath.
It's such a strange ordeal. Now, Dixie Heights might come into this and say, we're changing our tempo. We're going to let it fly because we feel good about our shooters and cause an upset.
Yeah.
Entirely possible. We got a battle of the Colonels. Anything is possible. But I don't know how much I can trust it based on just what I have in front of me.
Okay. Does that mean you're leaning more CovCath in the Battle of the Colonels?
I got to see CovCath live not that long ago, and that's a hard team to bet against.
Okay.
So, yeah, I would say for now, and I'm liable to flop that one 5 times before we get to the actual game, and today's Thursday, so that should tell you how wishy-washy my thoughts are here. But, yeah, I'll put a tentative check mark on CovCath, and don't hold me to it.
Okay. Let's move over to the other side of Region 9. We got Newport facing Holy Cross and Lloyd facing Ryle. The winner of each will then face each other and then move on to the 4 that we just covered, the winner of those.
Right.
So let's begin with the Wildcats, Newport. Bring them down for us.
Yeah, so 18-10 coming into this one. They've got the Holy Cross game coming up, and they win their region if they've learned from their mistakes.
Okay.
So they beat Holy Cross by 11 earlier this year. So this is overall, not necessarily this week.
Sure.
But they have losses to all of their next possible, or to both of their next possible opponents, 7 to Lloyd, 6 to Ryle. Close enough margins for me not to get too nervous about it. And they had a handful of close games on their docket where it was like, okay, this is – I hate using this example because it's the first one that comes to mind. And it was always bad for them. But the penultimate year of Scott Frost in Nebraska,
Okay.
when they were 3-9 or whatever, but like all of their losses were one score,
Yes.
it's not been as dire for Newport, obviously. But it is one of those things where it's like, okay, this team really was close to being a 21 or 22 win team at this juncture.
With Newport, it feels like it's not like their wins were close per se. Like, it didn't feel like the wins were a coin flip, but the losses were a lot closer than they probably needed to be, which is a little bit different than the Scott Frost situation.
Exactly.
So
exactly. That's and like I said, I don't know that it's that apt of a comparison, but it's the first thing that comes to mind when you say, "Oh, this team could have been so much better if they'd have won all their one scores."
paints a picture in my head.
Yeah, I'm about to say it gets the job done. But they do have a really good core. They've got the scores. James Turner's at 15, Griffin Starks 10.9, Yamil Rondon 14.4. They allow about 51 points per game. They've got dudes to clean up the glass. They just need a couple good breaks, as anyone does in this tournament. They need that coin flip to land the other way. And, I'm sure somebody taking an extra step on any given night, to provide an extra 6-7 points or whatever it ends up being is enough to do that. But when you factor in the emotions of tournament time and the nerves of the whole situation, it's going to be very interesting to see which way Lady Luck starts swinging when it comes to the Wildcat games.
Okay. And they are going to be facing off with Holy Cross.
Yes.
You want to break down the Indians for us?
Yeah, sure can. 17-11 coming into this, and I think they'll win the region if they can be the chaos creators.
Okay.
That's become kind of a phrase that I like to use fairly often on this podcast, and because I think that Holy Cross really fits the mold of what I mean by that. They've got 4 guys over 10 points per game, kind of like we talked about with Highlands earlier. Their team numbers are fairly average, 40, almost 45 from field goal, 35 behind the arc, a little over 70 from the charity stripe.
Okay.
On the higher end of points allowed, which makes me a little nervous with 58. But I say all that to tell you they are very much the underdogs of this bracket to me. I feel like, and I feel like for a lot of folks, they're probably like, okay, it's Newport's got Holy Cross and then who? It's not necessarily, okay, Newport's got Holy Cross.
Mm-hmm.
What happens this weekend with that? It feels like a game that people might try to glance over. And I think Newport has some of that offensive ability with those scorers and that ability to come from a bunch of different places to be like, no, we had a kind of a tougher run in the regular season than we wanted, but we are still a plus 500 team. We are still very capable of finding points from wherever they lay, and we can flip this momentum around. If you're not paying close enough attention to us, or even if you are, we can use our energy and kind of max out there. The break hasn't really been there for them, but they do have some interesting pieces, like I mentioned, to keep track of. And then, like, a handful of their main scorers are juniors. So this is more of a team that I'm watching next year, but still worth keeping on the radar because that chemistry that establishes between people that are in the same grade and have played together for as long as they have, it's going to be there. It's just a matter of if they can cash in on it or not.
Okay. Take your pick.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Newport here. I think that you can see the breaks a little bit more visibly there. You can see where things just went slightly off rail, whereas Holy Cross, like I said, I do think this is more of a long-term project and good experience for hopefully a pretty deep run in this thing next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's something to look forward to always is the next – when you have a good team that can still come back next year and just be like, yeah, we know what we're doing now. Let's just get right into it.
Or even, whenever you do manage to kind of catch lightning in the bottle, like Lakota West just beat St. X last night. Was not an expected outcome. Josh Tyson really helping that team get over the mark. A fairly young core there that said, no, you know what, we're not going to wait for our opportunity. We're just going to step into this. And I don't know how far, remaining they'll go, but it's absolutely still one of those things that they're going to be able to use that all off season long and come back even stronger next year.
Very good. All right, let's talk about the last matchup in Region 9. It is Ryle and Lloyd, the Juggernauts versus the Raiders. Start us off with Lloyd here.
Yeah, they have a very appropriate mascot. Is all I'm going to say. They have been a juggernaut in Kentucky basketball all year long, 24-6, third straight district championship just a couple of weeks ago, or last week, I guess. They handle themselves well. And I think that they win this region if the duo of E.J. Walker and Anthony Blacar just keep doing their thing. They have figured out what works. EJ is 19.2 points per game. Anthony's on 15.1. The duo is going to win more often than it's not. Kind of your Splash Brothers situation.
Yeah.
When you don't have one, you got the other always.
I was just say I hit 40% from 3. 11.6 boards for EJ. I'll take that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a pretty strong pair of dudes to lead your basketball team, isn't it?
Yeah.
Somebody that's averaging a double-double, 19 and 11. Everybody's shooting good from behind the arc. They eat well every time they're on the court. You just have to worry about a really good defense getting in your way or just a mega crazy offensive day for your opponent that for whatever reason EJ Anthony just maybe not feeling the rhythm as much as they usually do. But even still, that's at such a rare clip that you can't bet in that direction really.
So what is Ryle going to have to do to take down the Juggernaut?
This is kind of a 2-on-1 situation here. Landon Lorms has been their guy.
Wow.
He's going to have to will this team past Lloyd, and then I do think it kind of clears up a little bit for them down the pike, if they can get through the Juggernauts, which, it's going to be tough. But Lorms has been a star for the Raiders, 22.4 points per game. I believe he's their career all-time scorer now for the Raiders. He also partners his 22 points per game with over 6 boards. They've got 3 other guys that do average over 10 points per game, so it's not a solo venture, but you know where your bread's buttered. You know what's leading the charge. All those complementary pieces have to kind of step into that being Jonathan DeGroff, Anthony Capola, A.J. Davis, all 3 very capable of providing that spark, but you still want to run through Lorms just because it's where you are. He's proven to be that guy. And there's enough threat by everybody around him that you can still kind of show your hand to be like, look, he's our primary, but he's okay passing it out. We're not living and dying here. It's just a preference versus, necessity.
You have a strong star, but he's not afraid to give the ball to his teammates.
Exactly.
Great.
Exactly. Yeah, definitely not a pigeonholed team. Definitely a threat here in my mind, just because I do think Ryle has a little bit of that competitive edge in terms of kind of that nobody really expects us to win this, but also because they're still such a talented team that it all kind of works out in a weird, like, I'm trying to think of the right way to describe this, but it's like sure, nobody really expects us to be here, but we're not being overlooked. Mm-hmm. So it's like you don't feel insulted, but you've been given that bulletin board material all the same.
Yes. Okay. I see what you're saying.
Right.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it's almost a compliment, but it's still not. You know what I mean?
Yes.
By the other team. I really do think Ryle, if they can get past Lloyd, they might be the team that I would pick to be on the other side of the Region 9 finals to those 4 that we first talked about.
Okay.
But I do think it probably swings towards Lloyd here.
And let me ask you this. Do you feel like Lloyd is your pick to win the region?
Probably. I mean, it's hard to go away from anything but
and
the Jags.
It's 3
and
games away, obviously.
Right.
Yes.
And you assume that it's going to be Cooper versus Lloyd, or at least I do. Mm-hmm. But that's far from a guarantee. And I think Lloyd would, if I had to make a decision today, I would probably pick the Juggernauts to win this region.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, hey, that's what the tournament's all about, though, is chaos and fun. And just to recap it real quick, it's going to be Cooper and Highlands playing first in the first round. Let me go first round.
Yeah.
Cooper and Highlands, Covcath, Dixie Heights. Winners of each play each other. Move on to play the other 4, which is Newport facing off with Holy Cross and Lloyd facing off against Ryle.
Yes.
That's a good tournament.
It's a very good tournament.
Yeah.
And we have a whole host of Ohio games, and I believe we're going to send somebody to an Indiana game this for Friday. Make sure to check out the final quarter. It's been a really successful year for tri-state basketball teams because we still got so many alive.
Yes.
And so gives us plenty to talk about, which I will not be complaining about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we're talking about tournament time. It's March. Please sleep in April.
We do. Get your nitroglycerin pills.
There we go. And, of course, we're still just over a week away from Selection Sunday. That'll be March 17th on the Sunday. But you still have bracketologists working to figure out kind of where the committee is going to be putting these teams, trying to track things, put their best guess in. And we actually have a bracketologist in our own backyard in Northern Kentucky. So I talked with Hunter Sansom about being the Northern Kentucky bracket guy, the NKY bracket guy, what got him into it, and talk to him a little bit about this season so far. So let's go ahead and head to that. Joining me now is Hunter Sansom, the Northern Kentucky bracket guy on X. Thank you for joining me. Last week, we kind of started picking up some of the bracketologies, looking at yours, looking at ESPN, Fox Sports, kind of tracking where a lot of the local teams have been going. And I specifically wanted to mention what you've been doing last week because I think it's cool when, to be honest with you, it's just, you're just a guy that's doing this. You're not the big media corporations or the NCAA itself. What made you want to start doing bracketology?
So I've been just kind of tracking like the local teams. I moved up here in 2015 to go to NKU. Obviously NKU was really good when I came up here. Drew McDonald, that whole era. Got used to having Cincinnati, Xavier, NKU, Wright State, all of those teams in the tournament, as well as all the other bigger local brands. But it just got really fun to follow where teams were going to end up. And then Cronin and Mac left in 17 and 18, and suddenly Xavier and Cincinnati are fighting for their lives, just trying to make the tournament every year. I started kind of piecing together where I thought they would land, and what I realized is I was doing a bracket or a seed list without actually publishing a seed list. So during COVID, I kept it private. It was just more of my like hobby. I'm a nurse, so I was just trying to have something to kind of release and do something different. Got really into it. Decided I'll just throw it on Twitter and see what happens. Now it's X. and it's kind of taken off from here. It's become a hobby that I really would like to make it a permanent type of gig eventually, but staying away from the national media type of eyeball and not having any bias or anything has been fun. So just it's become a passion and something I can do to kind of take some stress off and have some different stress, if you will.
So what goes into it for you? Is it, a lot of like Excel sheets with looking at all the different stats and kind of comparing it that way?
So during the regular season, up until maybe the last week of February or so, I have an Excel sheet that I run data. It pulls from a couple different sites and pulls all the different metrics the committee looks at. So that's all your resume, all your predictive metrics, your net, your quadrant records, and all of that. And that puts it in an Excel sheet. And I have a formula that kind of just spits out a ranking 1 through 364. So I can have at any time like that ranking of all of the teams in the country. I then copy and paste that into a separate Excel sheet and just take that and I work the seeds from 1 through 45 or 47, somewhere in there, to get all of our at-large teams kind of placed. And then that gives me my bubble as well. So I do that, and then I can spit it into a graphic, make it look nice, and get it out to everybody. Once we get a little bit later into the season, I don't do that anymore because these teams are not moving drastically day to day. Even like BYU beat Iowa State last night on the road. It moved them like 5 spots. So I can do that without having to tear it apart and restart. The teams are kind of where they are for now. So I look at the metrics. I use warrennolan.com to pull up team sheets. They replicate the NCAA team sheets really well. And that gives me all my numbers and everything I need. So I can do what's called scrubbing. And I look at each team side by side and place them. Oh, Duke is behind Auburn. Duke is ahead of Houston, and that thing all the way down until I'm comfortable with where every team's at and think I have a good gist of where the committee would have them at this moment.
Okay. And I've noticed, kind of the last couple of weeks, you'll do this or you'll post more weekly. More recently, as we're getting to the end of the season, it's getting closer to daily. Are you when you're watching some of these games, are you already thinking in your head, this is how this is going to affect the spreadsheet in a way?
I try not to, just because I want to see the metrics kind of update and everything before I make that decision. But like last night, I'll use BYU Iowa State again.
Yeah.
I was already thinking, oh, Iowa State loses. I keep Kentucky at a 3. I move BYU up to a 6. Texas A&M beat Auburn last night. They were already going to the 3 line. It made life a little bit easier in my head as I was watching that at 11:30 last night or whatever it was. So I will say I do it some, but I try not to as much as I can.
Yeah, I know there was that Ohio State beating Nebraska in overtime, and they've kind of been sitting in your bubble space more recently. And so I wanted to also kind of talk to you about Xavier and UC, 2 more teams that have been in the bubble. I know earlier this week you had Xavier, I think, as a 12 seed. And as of today, which is, I'll say it's Wednesday, about 4:30. So they still have a game to play along with UC tonight. When Jackson and I are talking, that game will already have happened. So I'll kind of bring that up after our interview here. But what do you think needs to happen? Xavier has 2 more games left in the regular season to really solidify themselves as either an 11 seed or one of those play-in games.
Yeah, I definitely think Xavier cannot afford a loss tonight. So, I mean, it's 2.5 hours till tip. They're at Butler tonight. That is a quad 2 game, so it's a solid victory if they would get it. It wouldn't be a terrible loss overall, but the margins are just too thin for Xavier right now to lose. Same thing for Cincinnati. If they would lose either of their last 2, they have no shot. Both teams are going to need to go to their conference tournaments in New York or Kansas City, respectively, and do some damage. Xavier probably is going to need 1 win, or at least, depending on if they get like a UConn or a Marquette, they may get away with a loss if they keep it close. But Cincinnati will absolutely need to win at least 1, maybe 2 games in Kansas City.
Okay. I was wondering, do you need these teams to make deep runs, or is it more of just a, get to a quarter, a semifinal type thing, then make it all the way?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Xavier in the COVID year, when they played DePaul at Madison Square Garden the night before everything shut down. That knocked them out of the tournament because they took a bad loss. Xavier wouldn't necessarily get that this year because they're likely going to be playing on Thursday against a quality opponent, but they're a little bit on shakier ground than they were then. For Cincinnati, they're likely going to get a not great opponent, maybe not a tournament team in their first game potentially. They will need to beat them, and they're probably going to need some help. Cincinnati has a little bit further of a climb than Xavier does at this point.
Okay. Has the seasons for Xavier or UC kind of surprised you to this point? I'll say with UC's non-conference performance, I've been a little bit surprised with how they handled the Big 12, but I wanted to get your take on that as well.
So Xavier, I'll say they kind of performed to what I expected. I know a lot of people were hyping them up as some top 20 team, and then Trey Ray got hurt, and that kind of derailed their season. Once Trey Ray got hurt, I didn't necessarily think this was a tournament level team. And then Fremantle got hurt, and even less likely that they were going to make it. So they've been about on par with what I expected. Turning to Cincinnati, I don't know if you've tuned into the Mo Egger show when I've been on there a couple times, but I've said that there might need to be some sort of changes. I'm not saying West needs to go or anything like that. I'm just saying something from their philosophy has to change for next year because this has been a extremely detrimental year in my opinion. I know they've had some injuries, but Jizzle James made the jump that we all expected. He is a star, and Day-Day's been solid from the guard standpoint. They've got really good wings in Dylan, and Aziz is just such a beast down low. Like, the pieces were there for this to be a top 20 team, and even though they've had injuries, 17-12 was not what anybody in the area expected. I watched them NKU. I was at the NKU game when they played at NKU. I wasn't overly impressed, but it was early in the season in a road environment-ish. And I just kind of gave them the benefit of the doubt. But then they lost to Nova, and I've been very surprised by Cincinnati this year.
Yeah, and I've been kind of saying that the loss, or not the loss, but the loss for Xavier to Cincinnati kind of seems weirder in comparison in the long run now. But I also think that the Crosstown Shootout is just a weird game every year.
It's a top 3 rivalry in the country. Like, neither team's going to show up and play poorly. So, that's one of those, it's a toss-up even if one team's clearly better than the other. Yeah.
That's like, it's like I'm a Purdue grad and my dad said, "Are you going to watch the Purdue IU game about a week ago or so now?" And I was like, "No, probably not, because it'll stress me out too much." And I was really glad that I stopped watching at some point because I was like, I wouldn't have been able to take that in the second half.
Yeah, you just throw everything out with rivalries. It's really hurts Xavier because, they'd be 2-8 in Quadrant 1, and we're probably talking about them being a 9 or a 10 seed right now if they had that game.
Interesting. Okay. Let's move a little bit to the Kentucky side of things, some teams that have been a little bit more solid in your rankings. UK, Louisville, specifically Kentucky, first year under a new coach. Yeah. You've been having them kind of sit in that 3 seeds area. Was this something that you expected to start out the year?
So I think I've watched more BYU basketball in the last couple of years. I was on night shift for one as a nurse, so that helped. But I've watched probably more BYU basketball than a lot of people in the area had, just by nature of what I do. So I knew that he was going to bring in a completely different style and a completely different kind of philosophy. And I won't say I expected him to be this good, but I expected him to perform up to their expectations a little bit. And the roster that was brought in, I expected them to be pretty good.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things where it's UK at the end of the day too. It's kind of like, it's Duke, it's North Carolina, whatever, these schools are going to bring in the talent and in some cases even develop maybe the less expected stars.
Yeah. I think you always expect North Carolina being on the bubble right now is a shock. Like, you expect those blue blood type of teams to just always put it together, and that's what Pope's been able to do.
Let's look at the SEC a little bit in general as well. This has been such a strong year for that conference.
Yeah.
Were you ever surprised at whether it's some of the data that has come through from those games, or just who keeps ending up at the higher ends of that conference?
I thought the SEC was going to be really good this year.
Mm-hmm.
I am surprised that it's as good as it is. I didn't expect them to have the non-conference they did. They played a ton of great schedules, and that obviously helps, but they won a lot of those games. I mean, Auburn, Alabama, Kentucky, all three just had crazy good non-conference seasons. Same for Tennessee. So I'm surprised, but at the same time, I'm not super shocked that like Kentucky's in 7th place or Texas A&M's now thriving and beating Auburn. They're all really talented teams with a lot of good coaching. And especially in college basketball with the portal era, being able to coach is such, like, you've got to be able to get these players to buy in. So I'm not shocked that we're seeing kind of what we're seeing from the SEC.
Okay. Now, I do want to ask you, because obviously with the bracketology side of things, you're trying to predict where teams are going to end up when Selection Sunday comes around. We're about 2 weeks away now? No, or a week? A little over a week away.
12 days, yeah. 13 days, something like that.
And math, whatever.
Math is hard.
I'm a mass comm major, and I'm not afraid to say that. So, so you're trying to get as close to the selection committee as possible when you're making your predictions.
Yeah.
Does this carry over well into the actual tournament? Are you able to make a good run on the brackets?
Not any different than I was beforehand. I mean, even like doing college, like I'm in a pick'em with a bunch of bracketologists on X, and I'm like, we're batting like 50% collectively. Like you would think so, but no, unfortunately, while I can tell you like the strengths and weaknesses of all of these teams, I can't necessarily be like, oh, this one's going to win. That's the fun thing about college basketball. And especially in March, it's a wild card, and that's what makes it the greatest tournament in the country or the world.
I can't disagree with that. Thank you for talking with me about this. Obviously, you are Bracket NKY on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it. NKY Bracket Guy, as you mentioned, you've been on Mo Egger's show more recently. How has that been going for you?
It's good. Mo reached out, and unofficial, or I guess official now, bracketologist on the Mo Egger show comes with a luxurious $0 salary. But no, it's been great. Any opportunity I can get to just talk basketball. I have a passion for any of the Cincinnati teams. So just getting to be able to talk with you, talk with Mo, anybody, just to kind of talk Cincinnati basketball is what I'm here to do.
Absolutely, man. Is there anything else that you want to add before we go?
I don't think so. I just appreciate you having me on. Always happy to hop on. Thanks for working with my schedule.
Yeah, of course, man. Thank you for your time, and we'll send it back on inside. And like he said, we recorded that on Wednesday night. It was about 4:30 or so. So the Xavier Butler game and the UC Kansas State games had not been played yet.
Right.
So I did want to update us today about kind of where those teams stand. So Xavier did beat Butler. And
very impressive showing.
Very, very solid showing.
Yeah.
And so his latest from Thursday morning puts them basically in like the 48 slot, which is a 12 seed, playing against Indiana in a play-in.
Okay.
UC losing to Kansas State, out.
I kind of figured.
And it, we kind of talked about it a little bit there. This is just a rough season for UC. It's kind of been a number of rough seasons really since Mick Cronin left. I don't know if I kind of agree with him. I don't know if getting rid of Wes is the answer at this point, but something does need to change at a structural level.
Right. Well, and it gets kind of hard to go away from addressing Wes because, this is year 3, right?
It's year 3 or 4, and I can never remember. I know we talked about it.
Right. I want to say
stall a little bit.
I want to say it's 3 because I thought we kicked the can down the road to year 4.
Yes, it's year 3. No, it's year 4.
Oh, this
year 4. This is year 4, but it took those historic coaches till season 5 to get back into
Okay.
the tournament. Was
That-
my historical breakdown.
Yes, but also a very different situation at this point,
Yes.
relative to that with the NIL. You can rebuild a roster way quicker because you have so many more players at your disposal
Yes,
to
and
try to recruit.
I wouldn't be surprised to see some transfer portal moves coming up in the offseason for UC.
Yeah, but when you've got guys like Jizzle James leading the charge there, you do need to be a tournament team.
Yes,
And,
absolutely.
And the end of season struggles is not something is going to have to give. I don't know if that's a coaching change. I don't, that's not for me to decide. But
I agree.
It's getting harder to make excuses, I guess, for why they're not there because they very much should be. So
Yeah. And just to kind of round out the localish teams, Louisville a 7 seed from Hunter, Kentucky a 3 seed, and Ohio State in the other play-in game as a 12 seed. I do think North Carolina could sneak in here in the last few days, especially with the tournaments coming up. And kind of like he and I discussed, it's probably going to take Xavier to at least win one game, maybe 2 games in the Big East tournament to really solidify their spot in the Big Dance.
yeah,
But we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. But you don't have to wait and see all of our amazing sports coverage here at Fox 19. You can download the Fox 19 app,
Yep.
sports app specifically, to get all of the great highlights that our sports team gets each day. You can watch our podcast directly from there. And then, of course, you can follow along on Spotify, Amazon, and Apple podcasts to listen wherever you get your podcasts. And that's, I think, all of our pitches. Do you have anything else you want to cover, Jackson?
no, I don't think so.
Wonderful.
Just again, a cheap, quick plug for final quarter. Even though I think my season's done as far as shooting, still going to be watching along, just like everybody else does on Friday nights. So, encourage you guys to do the same.
That's the fun part about it.
Absolutely.
Thank you all for joining us. We will see you next week.
Have a good one.